I'm Barry Briggs from Directions on Microsoft, your best independent source of information on Microsoft strategy, technology, and licensing. We help you get the most for your Microsoft dollar. Now today, I'm going to talk about an incredibly important topic, especially in this day and age, the age of AI. And that's data governance, ensuring that your enterprise data is safe, secure, and used properly, and how Microsoft's suite of compliance and data governance tools, Purview, can help. Now, we all know that the management of data has always been vital to enterprise corporate governance and to enterprise IT organizations. But as more and more AI-centric applications are deployed across organizations, proper data governance is even more essential. AI, as we've learned, can find data that you didn't even know you had in an instant. So, before we start, let me say this video is just a little bit different from others from Directions, where we usually just dive right into Microsoft products and services and all their capabilities and limitations. Today, I'm going to first spend some time discussing the scope of data governance, all the areas it touches, and why it's so important. It's a big topic, worthy, no doubt, of a semester-long graduate-level course, so we're going to fly by at warp speed, but it's important that we at least briefly cover the principles, methodologies, key measurements, and then we'll get to the tools. Let's get started. So our topic for today, data governance in the age of AI. Now you may remember a while back I presented a video about Microsoft's AI strategy in which I showed Microsoft's view of the new application stack. Now this is how Microsoft envisions next generation applications. On the top is the user interface layer. We all know it. Microsoft calls it Copilot. There are lots of them. And all the Copilots rest upon and depend on language models, LLMs. And those language models, of course, consume masses of data in the enterprise ecosystem. Data is the foundation for these new sorts of applications. And if the foundation is weak, of course, then the whole thing can come tumbling down. The point, of course, is that generative AI apps are built upon, they depend upon your enterprise data. If that data is not well structured, well classified, well protected, your apps will reflect that, and that will introduce risk. Perhaps even existential risk. So let's spend some time talking about all of this. First, let's spend a few moments on why data governance is so important and why you need a strong data governance practice right now. Then let's talk about, in some detail, about what it is. It isn't new, of course. So let's review some of the core principles and ideas behind data governance. Then we'll talk about what you can do using Microsoft's tools, and we'll focus, of course, on Purview, its suite of compliance and data governance services. Now, we're not going to cover every single detail. We won't be exhaustive, but hopefully we can give you enough to help you get started and to help you assess what your next steps in data governance should be. Now, we all know today there's a lot of data. That's an understatement. And it comes in all different formats and types. It comes at real time. It comes in at speed. You know, I used to make the joke that every enterprise IT organization runs on Excel. I still think that's true, but let's not forget there's also Office documents, there's streaming IoT telemetry, click streams. Of course, we still have transactional databases. We have warehouses. We have NoSQL databases, maybe catching logs and social media and so on. We have warehouses. We all know this, right? And there's a statistic that I read someplace that we're collecting something like 402 million terabytes of data per day. Believe it, don't believe it, it's a lot. But just to give you a more pragmatic view, on the right-hand side, you see in this chart some statistics I collected. And Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, said 2 years ago that their data state was over 550 petabytes in size. It's probably doubled that by now. It wouldn't surprise me. Bank of America's catching up. Walmart's in the same ballpark. Hundreds of petabytes of data. It's just a lot. Now, obviously, for CIOs, for business people, for analysts, for executives. All this data means you can build wholly new kinds of applications with all sorts of new insights, predictive analytics, visualizations, and so forth. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of very granular information. However, it does come with a lot of risk, and we're going to talk about how to mitigate that risk over the next few slides, and in fact, for the rest of the presentation. Well, why is this such a big deal? What does it mean to you? Well, say you've just been appointed as the Chief Data Officer for your organization. Here are some of your challenges. And in fact, here are the challenges for anyone who has accountabilities for data across your organization. Everyone must look at this and recognize and address these questions. What data do you have? Where is it stored? Who owns it? Is the right data being used for the right purpose? Are the people and are the applications using that data? Are they authorized to use it? Are they authorized to read it? Are they authorized to write it? Who's changing the data? Are we compliant with governmental regulations like privacy and financial regulations, and are users' rights respected? Is the data good? Where did it come from? Is it protected against bad actors? Who's hoarding sensitive data? Who's going to guarantee its quality? And so on and so on. I won't read them all to you, but you get the idea that the person who is accountable for data, anyone who's accountable for data, has a lot of challenges before them. What could possibly go wrong? Well, there's a lot that can go wrong. Bad data governance, bad data management can result in serious financial damage, or even worse, in some respects, reputational damage to your organization. Maybe even in the billions, as the GDPR and the EU's AI Act can find percentages of a company's revenue. That can mean a lot of money, as some of the statistics show. And with AI, whole new challenges arise. If you look at these prompts below, you can easily imagine how dangerous they could be, leaking confidential data or personal information to public AI sites. Now, of course, none of these prompts are necessarily malicious or intentionally so, but you could see that they might result in data leakage, financial issues, or even regulatory violations. And this, by the way, highlights a theme that we'll come back to again and again, which is that technology like Purview, which we'll talk about in a minute, can only go so far. Awareness and training of your users as to the risks and vulnerabilities of AI usage is important. Okay, let's take a breath for a second. What is governance? Well, we all know corporate governance is defined as the processes, accountabilities, and practices and rules by which a company is managed. It's how you run your company. Data governance is defined as all those things, the processes, accountabilities, practices, and rules by which the organization's data is collected, managed, used, regulated, and secured. Now, this has always been important, but with AI's reach, with its speed, with its ability to find things at light speed, data governance can be an existential issue. Good news here is that in response, Microsoft has accelerated its already substantial investments in both compliance and data governance under the Purview brand. I mentioned this in my last video. To me, at least, Purview is an unsung hero in the Microsoft portfolio. It's received tons of development in the past few years. And in my view, it's a real industry leader, certainly way ahead of the other cloud vendors in compliance and governance. Now, to be clear, as I said in the last slide, Purview doesn't solve all of your governance challenges. You and your teams need to use its capabilities. You need to train your users. You need accountable individuals responsible for the various aspects of data governance. And we'll talk about all of this in a moment. So how do we wrangle all this data? How do we get it under control? What are the things we need to be thinking about even before we start using Purview's technologies? Now, I think of data governance as at the intersection of three IT domains: security, compliance, and risk. And nearly every IT persona in some way has some responsibility for it. Not only that, the results of the work by all these IT data governance people are highly visible to a wide range of executives, leadership, and even government regulators. IT pros must, for example, ensure the accuracy, security, and integrity of financial results reported to the relevant authority, or for reporting on the use of personal customer information across the organization, and so on. Now, caveat, there's a huge overlap between data governance and in particular regulatory compliance. So in this presentation, we're explicitly not talking as much about compliance. So while things like data retention and disposition reviews and e-discovery are huge and important topics, we'll save them for another video, so hang on for a few weeks. Today we're focused on protecting your data estate as you begin to deploy AI applications. But let's be clear, data governance is not simply an IT function. While IT engineers and professionals set up the technical aspects of data, access control and passwords and security and integration and so on, business analysts are the ones that select which data to use and leverage that data for their functions, such as analytics and reporting, forecasting, and so forth. Now, this is a little bit of a preview. It's how Microsoft has designed its tools in Purview with features aimed specifically at the IT technical professional persona and tools for the business user persona as well. And we'll get into quite a bit more detail in just a few slides, but I want to point out that at the top you see an accountable individual, the Chief Data Officer, and I recommend the Chief Data Officer either reporting to or as a peer to the CIO. Why? Because as you saw from the list of challenges a few slides ago, it's a big, all-encompassing job, and it's not something that you can share with other responsibilities. Now, these core principles are really just to help you get started. These are basic, hygienic principles of data governance, and it's a good way to start your data governance practice. The first one's the most important. Know your data, all the locations where your data is stored, what's in them, who owns them, how they're controlled. That's actually a lot easier said than done, as we'll see. Encrypt your data so that it's not vulnerable to hackers. Deploy access controls so that only authorized individuals or software can read, edit, or write data. And use and in fact internalize this notion of the principle of least privilege, which means that instead of giving everyone admin privileges to all your data, only give them the access that they absolutely need for their jobs. It's all on a need-to-know basis. And in conjunction with access controls, create a data classification strategy. Label your content and train your users, maybe even your apps as well, to respect and to use the labels. Keep your data clean, valid, up to date. Understand what laws and regulations apply to you and to your business, and therefore how regulated data must be managed. And finally, since the quantity of data continuously increases, and as often as not, its quality continuously decreases, you must therefore continuously monitor and report on the state of your data. I want to spend a moment talking about just why knowing your data is such a challenge today. All the way back in the 1970s, I worked on a mainframe at NASA, and it had just 200 megabytes, not even gigabytes or petabytes, megabytes of disk storage. And frankly, data governance wasn't a real problem then. There was just one application, not a whole lot of data. But nowadays, our employees are connected with a variety of productivity, communication, and collaboration applications in Office, all accessible via the Microsoft Graph. We might have hundreds of or thousands of line of business applications. It's certainly not unheard of that Fortune 10 or Fortune 100 company will have several thousand applications in these different domains: CRM, sales, commerce, finance, legal, and so on. And we collect all of that in lakes and warehouses and Delta lakes and what have you. And it's all potentially accessible instantly by AI. And the architecture of data in the enterprise has completely changed in the last 20 years. Not that long ago, in the 2000s, we thought of the canonical enterprise data architectures having 4 levels. At the bottom, master data management level with core authoritative data about customers and products and so on. Transactional systems, which collected the transactions of our customers, Although all that data flowed up into a relationally based data warehouse, and that flowed up into business-specific enterprise marts, like for special purpose applications like campaign management or forecasting or what have you. This picture, I should point out, is somewhat loosely based on the classic texts on the subject by Kimball and Inman. It was fairly elegant, fairly simple. But now we have many tiers, we have many formats, many structures, might even have data in several clouds, several speeds. And this is just really to evoke the notion that it's a complicated world. So on the left here, you have all the possibilities for NoSQL databases in Azure, AWS, and GCP, open source, so on. On the right, you have the relational databases, Microsoft proprietary databases, AWS, open source. And we still need relational databases for the tight integrity constraints to support mission critical applications like ERP. So none of this stuff ever goes away, but we add to it, we add to it, and add to it. And so we get very, very complex, interrelated data ecosystems. And in many cases, one application is moving data from itself to another, and so forth via integration mechanisms. So it can become a very complicated world. And that's why I call it a data ecosystem. So knowing your data can be hard, but it's important. Now, let's talk about encryption for just a second. Some people think that encryption is data governance. And it's true. Encryption can help you protect data from snooping and exfiltration by hackers and so on. But it's by no means a panacea. There's a lot more to it. For example, you need to lock down your data with role-based access control. So even if it's encrypted, you need to decide who's allowed to take a look at it. So role-based access controls, access control lists, and so forth. And so you want to look at this first from the business requirements perspective. Say, what policies do I want to implement? For example, only U.S. HR professionals can access U.S. employee systems and so on. And one other point that I'll make is that as co-pilots are rolling out in organization, doing all of this can take time. It can be resource intensive. You may want to just take an easy way out and use restricted SharePoint search, which is a feature of SharePoint. And what that will do will be to whitelist certain SharePoint sites and prevent Copilot from seeing all the others. And that can be a good way to at least get started using SharePoint, using Copilot. Now, another critical activity is to classify your data using sensitivity labels. Now, this means you have to step back and say, well, what for my organization or for your organization constitutes sensitive? And there are degrees of sensitivity, right? Now, the actual labels themselves, it's up to you. You can pick the label, the text of the labels themselves. Microsoft used to use these labels on the left-hand side: high business impact, medium, low business impact, or none, meaning public information. Militaries use top secret and secret. Other organizations use highly sensitive. It doesn't matter. You know, it's just important to know that they're typically content types and information that only selected executives or only selected people can see, that maybe, or content that's somewhat sensitive, but maybe not business critical. Low impact might be things like embargoed blogs. And the entire company can see it, but not the press until a certain date, and so on. So this establishes who can access what, and it limits where the sensitive data can and should be stored. It's important to monitor this. So if you say that a given SharePoint site or a given database cannot have high business impact or top secret data in it, you need to check from time to time. Again, we've said this before: training. Data protection is everybody's business. You need to educate your users to use and to respect labels. We also need to keep our data clean. When we talk about data quality, you often hear the phrase that 90% of all AI is getting the data ready for AI, and it's really true. Why is this so hard? And it is hard. Well, it's trying to decide if the data is correct. Is it properly formatted? Is it even valid? Let's pick an example. So here are 6 different versions of Microsoft's address. Which one is correct? Which one will get the mail delivered properly? Well, if you know if the one on the top left is in fact the correct address. The one next to it is correct, but it has Kirkland instead of Redmond. Next to that has the wrong zip code and it's street instead of way. Still, probably get the mail delivered. But on the bottom left, everything's right except it's Massachusetts instead of Washington. The middle bottom, it's in fact the old address for Microsoft when it was very first founded 50 odd years ago in New Mexico. And then there's another one that's completely made up with an invalid zip code. So the job of data quality is to flag what it thinks is right, what it thinks is, and more importantly, what it thinks is wrong. Here's another example. Which of these email addresses is actually the correct one for Bill Gates? I'll let you do the research and figure out. Now, this can be particularly difficult in certain geographies. This is an example of something that I actually received at my home from India, and you'll see that there's not even a street address in here. It just says this is house number 16, and it's beside certain palace, and that actually gets the mail delivered in this particular location. But how do you decide whether that's actually legitimate or correct? Now, moving on, data governance is a key component of regulatory compliance. And what we've shown in this picture is what I call the regulatory compliance life cycle. It starts with things like the corporate charter and corporate policies and laws from international laws like GDPR, national, regional laws, and industry standards. Then knowing where there's data that might actually be regulated by and covered by those laws, building the protection, and then potentially responding to litigation or legal requests for that data, and also being able to report it on where that data is. This is Barry's law of regulatory compliance. You have to not only comply with all the laws, regulations, and policies, but you also have to be able to continuously prove that you've complied through reporting. So that covers some of the dimensions of data governance. It's not everything, and it's kind of a flyby. But now let's take a look at how Microsoft has designed Purview to help you address some of these issues. The Purview, as we've noted before, is Microsoft's umbrella brand for compliance and data governance services. And if we look at the box on the right, the top 3 larger boxes are the data governance services and capabilities that Purview offers. Now, Purview offers a lot of other features and services specifically targeting regulatory compliance. I'm not going to talk about those as much in this presentation. We're going to focus mostly on the data governance pieces of Purview. Now, there's a few important details before we go on. One is that where do you find this? So Purview is at purview.microsoft.com. It used to be called compliance.microsoft.com. It used to be called compliance and security and compliance portal. Anyway, it's now at purview.microsoft.com, and it's under continuous development as well. And you'll see, so from time to time, you see new features. It's an umbrella brand, as I mentioned, so it brings together previously separate compliance services and Azure governance services. Now, this is a bit of a challenge because Microsoft 365 compliance services, for the most part, are charged by seat and by tier. So you all know E3, E5, and so forth. Data governance in Azure is typically charged for by capacity and consumption. And this kind of runs into this kind of drives some confusion. And Purview, just to further complicate it, has 2 tiers which are named completely different than the others. And those 2 tiers are called Free and Enterprise. Free comes with E3. The free tier of Purview, I'll be very blunt with you, is pretty lame and almost useless. The Enterprise version is likely what all organizations who are serious about data governance really need. Enterprise comes with E5. You can also purchase it separately from E5, and that has many of the features that we're going to be talking. It has all the features that we're going to be talking about going forward. Now, as we mentioned before, Microsoft has architected Purview's data governance services for around two personas: the IT persona and the business persona. IT persona on the left-hand side manages the physical data estate. The business persona, I'm going to probably be calling that person the business analyst going forward. On the right-hand side, we'll talk about the IT persona first. And the role of the IT persona, steps one is, remember we talked about need to know your data. Well, that's what the IT persona is doing with the data map. And it's a hierarchical list of all of the physical data sources. And you can segregate these by dev, test, and prod, and so on. You can connect to third-party data sources. You can connect to data sources in other clouds, and so on. It's the thing that manages all the roles and permissions, and allows you to scan all these data sources for metadata, things like, the names of the files, the schemas, the table names, and so on, and the column names and so forth in databases, and suck that in as information into the data map. The data map is part of the scanning process. You can also set up rules by which you classify the data. Remember, we talked about that. There's all sorts of ways to filter on what data you're going to classify. Our point that we will make here is that Purview has a huge library of data patterns that suggest PII that you can select from. So if you want to scan for and search for data that matches the pattern of an Australian driver's license, you can do that. Or American Social Security number, dash 2 numbers, dash 4 numbers, you can do that too. And then it will scan and tell you, report back where it found information that looks like it might match these particular patterns. And then it can automatically classify that data and using rules that you set up. And you can classify data manually. You can do it according to entire SharePoint sites. You can actually have AI come in and find all data that looks, for example, like it might be a contract or some other kind of sensitive information, and automatically stamp it with a particular label, and so on. And you can use labels to enforce permissions, such, for example, you can say, if it's top secret, it'll be automatically encrypted so that only authorized users can view or edit or print going forward. Here's an example of a label attached to an email document. In this case, it's a general. It's not controlled by anything. Now, on the business analyst side, a broader set of features, the business analyst sees something called the unified catalog. And it decomposes into a set of artifacts called, first of all, governance domains, typically corresponding to business units. Things like, and that will have business terms, metrics. We'll talk about those in just a second. We'll have data products within the unified catalog. So these are collections of data that correspond to a particular business problem. Data quality, rules and reports, data lineage, and we'll show you what all of those are. So we move into this business domain. Here's what the hierarchy of artifacts looks like. We talked about the construct called the unified catalog. And within that, there are these somewhat unfortunately called governance domains, which usually correspond to business units. Don't have to, but they usually do, such as sales or marketing. Business analysts within each domain can create data products, which, as we mentioned, are collections or kits of data, which are collected from various sources, but which are relevant to a specific business problem. For example, creating a quarterly report, maybe pulling data from a SharePoint site, Excel spreadsheets, and from ERP systems. Governance domains also can support metrics called OKRs, objectives and key results. Those are expressed as things like, we will increase widget sales by 10% by Q1, and a business glossary, which holds the definitive definitions of terms. For example, what is a customer? Or maybe more interestingly, for our company, what are the attributes that define a small business customer for this particular organization? Or what is the definition of the southern region, or what have you? The idea being that everybody and all the uses of these terms all agree. Data quality rules describe the overall quality of the data, and data lineage tells us where the data came from, like from a website or from another app, and where it might subsequently be used. And finally, there's the data, all the databases, tables, documents, SharePoint libraries, and so on. So here's an example, a quick one, of a data product it's inside this dotted line and supports the use cases in orange. These various data sources, claims and demographics and visits and so forth are used by business analysts, in this case a healthcare firm, to do specific tasks like underwriting and analytics and so forth. It's obviously not the whole data estate. It's just the relevant data items that are necessary for the analyst to do their tasks. And here's how Purview thinks about data quality. These are all the different rule types that you can impose to help you scan data and understand how good it is. Is the data fresh? When was it last updated? Do all the values in a column, are they unique? Which is actually kind of important, for example, for primary and secondary keys. Does it match string format? So, for example, does the postal code have 5 digits or 5 digits and a dash and then 4 digits, which would match a zip code? And if it doesn't, then we flag an error, and so on. So we have all these different capabilities. We can even build our own if we want. We can even have AI auto-generate rules based on source data, and then we can report on that. And we can look at how well the particular data source complies with all the data quality rules that we've set up. And this is something that you should do from time to time, right? So if you might notice that, just in the last week, all of a sudden my data quality score declined by 10 or 20 or 30%. Well, then you can start to look at, well, why? What's the root cause for all of that? And then we'll talk about one way to determine that in just a second. But before we do, it's important to note that Purview's data quality, it doesn't try to fix things. Remember when we looked at those addresses, it wasn't clear what the right answer necessarily was. So it doesn't try to fix our issues. It can offer recommendations like fix the zip code or what have you, but it doesn't always know enough to be able to fix really complex issues like does the zip code match the state? And not all data sources support all the rules. For example, AWS S3 buckets may not support all the complexities that Purview offers. So you need to check that before you deploy these. And we talked about what happens if the data quality declines all of a sudden. And data lineage is one way to find the root cause. So in this case, we're watching data move from one system to another. It starts off with a user, goes into a commerce database, it might go into an order managed database, go to a shipping database, and so on. And we can see that perhaps we have a new user or we have a new salesperson entering a new order or something, and perhaps that person doesn't know how to do it. Starts entering data that's invalid or sloppy. That tells us two things. One, we need to maybe spend some time training that salesperson or that user, point one. Or we may need to go in and add some data validation rules into the user interface. Point is here now is that through this, we can now start to look at where did the data come from, good or bad? Is it the right data that we want to use in our application? Which one of these is the right data to use in our application? And where is it going after we're done with it? So maybe we don't want to use, on the right-hand side, the rounded data that we got originally from, say, the user or from the order system. And so we can have a graphical view. In this case, where did my Customer 360 view come from? You can see all the data sources and the data that contribute to building my Customer 360 model, and then where is it used? We can also have metrics in our data products. In our governance domains, and these are linked to data products. It might be linked to more than one of them, but it basically says here's an owner, here's a definition, date, and results. And it's really quite simple. Achieve a 10% increase in sales of widgets by such and such a date, according to accountable owner Steve. And Steve is responsible for examining the data and making sure that this particular OKR is achieved, and taking taking corrective action if it doesn't look like it will be. Lastly, almost lastly, we'll talk about a new feature inside of Purview called DSPM, or Data Security Posture Management. And it's a fascinating set of reports that, among other things, shows us all the AI interactions that users have with Copilots. And so we can actually see over time how Copilot is being used. It also notes, in case when using Copilot, if users are looking for sensitive data types, if they're accessing labeled data, and who's doing that, if they're using potentially harmful or profane or harassing content in their prompts and so forth. So this is a really fascinating area and well worth your time to spend looking at and using. I also point out that this is under active development. Expect to see a lot of new features going forward, and there's lots of new features coming. The last thing I'll talk about, specifically with respect to AI and building your own AI applications, is that there are a number of new features inside of AI Foundry which allow you to govern how your AI applications are used. And so in this case, the user is asking what's the best Acme branded anvil for catching a roadrunner. And we can put a whole bunch of checks in to see if the user is actually allowed to ask about that, if the prompt contains harmful or violent content. And maybe this one does. And is it compliant with applicable regulations and so on? In this case, we decide it's okay. It's this particular brand, but this is part of Microsoft's push in responsible AI, but it's also part of data and AI governance. And if you want even more, AI Foundry integrates not only with Purview, but also with some fascinating third-party capabilities for expanded monitoring and governance in particular use cases and geographies. Okay, last thing. Here's a note on Purview licensing. We talked about this a little bit before. Remember, we said that Purview is a brand that covers both Microsoft 365 and Azure and others. Remember that Microsoft 365 is licensed by user and by tier. Azure is licensed by capacity and consumption. Never the twain shall meet. These are difficult to reconcile. So you'll see some features in Purview are by tier, like e-discovery, for example. Others are by capacity or consumption. Nothing we can do about it, and it doesn't look like there's anything Microsoft can do about it, so just be prepared. Now, there are a few things missing in Purview. We'll talk about those just for a second. One is, we talked about in the beginning about enterprise data, master data management. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I built one of the largest MDM systems on the planet when I was at Microsoft. MDM systems provide core authoritative data to other line of business systems. So sales, marketing, and billing should all have the same address for any given customer, and MRP and commerce and support should all have the same parts information for any given product. And that's the purpose of MDM, so that if I'm going to send a bill to a particular corporate CFO, we should know who he is and what his address is and so on. And all the systems should have that same name and address for that CFO. This is a hard problem, by the way. So Microsoft doesn't have itself an MDM solution, but it does recommend partner solutions from these 4 companies. The other thing Microsoft doesn't seem to be too focused on is the whole concept of enterprise data models and enterprise process models. That is to say, the canonical customer model that spans the entire enterprise. And Microsoft's strength, and we said this in the AI video a few months back, Microsoft's strength is in tactical departmental solutions, and that might be the right business move. However, to go from department to department often requires complex data transformations, processing, maybe data enhancement as we cross these boundaries and so forth. So that can still be a pain. And so these enterprise level artifacts remain problematic. Other companies are looking at how to apply AI to infer common data models and common data processes common enterprise processes, business processes like Celonis and knowledge graphs like relational AI and so forth. But this doesn't seem yet to be an area that Microsoft is really focusing on. Okay, finally, so what can you do right now? First things first, remember and internalize that data governance is foundational. It's integral. It's essential for your AI strategy. If you want to have useful, compliant, safe AI apps, you need to do the things that we've talked about in this video. You need to know your data. You need to assign access controls and classifications. You need to keep it clean. You need to monitor its usage continuously. And above all, you need to assign accountable individuals who will do all these things. As we've discussed, Purview can help, but it does require executive and IT commitment, and most importantly, employee training. Data governance is everybody's job, and now is the time. That's our speech for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Look forward to hearing your questions. You can reach me at bbriggs@directionsonmicrosoft.com.